Everything changed the day I decided to surprise my parents with a trip to Italy. For months, I had saved every spare dollar from my tutoring job, skipping dinners out with friends, and ignoring new wardrobe temptations. I spent countless nights researching destinations, picking the perfect quaint coastal town, and imagining the look on my mother's face when she learned I'd covered every expense. My parents rarely splurged on themselves, always citing responsibilities. I wanted to give them something extravagant, a memory they could cherish. Yet, even while finalizing the itinerary, a nagging thought pressed itself against my mind. My younger sister, Allison, had always been the family's golden child. She was the one who got brand new phones each Christmas, who received lavish praise even when I scored higher grades, and who seemed to have Dad wrapped around her finger. I'd sometimes felt invisible, or perhaps overshadowed, but this trip was my bid for acknowledgement. I believed that for once they would realize who truly cared, who took the initiative to give them something unforgettable. Months of planning transformed into a neat package of tickets and reservations. The night I presented it, my heart practically hammered out of my chest. My mother looked stunned, Dad seemed emotional, and I finally felt like I was the dutiful daughter they'd always wanted me to be. They kissed me on the forehead, hugging me tightly. The relief I felt was immeasurable. It was as though everything had realigned in that moment, and I convinced myself that in our family, unconditional love was still possible. That, as I would soon discover, was a naive assumption, and it would eventually unravel in the cruelest way possible. I had no idea how quickly gratitude could curdle into betrayal, nor how hope could shatter beneath false smiles. The first sign of trouble came just a week later. I received an excited phone call from Allison, though her voice carried that familiar smugness. She babbled on about how thrilled she was to visit the Amalfi Coast, to dine in Tuscan vineyards, and to bask in the sunlit piazzas I'd painstakingly chosen. My stomach sank as I tried to comprehend her words. This was supposed to be my parents' trip, a gift from me for them and them alone. When I confronted Allison, she casually mentioned that Mom and Dad had invited her to accompany them because they felt it would be more fun to have the whole family present. Except, of course, I hadn't been asked to come along. At first, I assumed there had been some misunderstanding. Surely my parents wouldn't exclude me from a trip I'd worked so hard to arrange. But when I phoned Dad, his explanation stung like a slap. He muttered something about not wanting me to stress over more expenses, that I'd done enough by paying for the flights and accommodations. Then he insisted Allison deserved a reward for finishing her final exams. There was no recognition of my efforts, no invitation to join. It felt as if they'd decided my sister needed the spotlight more than I did. Anger coiled inside me like a viper, but I swallowed it. I told myself to let them enjoy the trip, to avoid creating drama. Perhaps their joy would somehow become my joy. Deep down, though, a bitter voice whispered that I'd never be their priority. Even so, I tried to keep the peace, unaware that the real betrayal was yet to come. My tenuous hope and familial loyalty was about to be tested in a way that would echo for years. While they embarked on what should have been my parents' dream vacation, I stayed behind, burying myself in work and clinging to the faint hope that things might settle upon their return. Each social media post of Allison posing by cathedrals, sipping cappuccinos, or flaunting beach selfies scraped at my nerves. My parents' occasional texts were short, mostly updates about how wonderful Italy was and how unforgettable everything felt. They thanked me again for the trip, but not once did they suggest how much they wished I were there too. I refused to dwell in self-pity, reminding myself I was an adult who could handle disappointment. Yet, one morning, my phone buzzed with an incoming international call. It was my mother, her voice quaking in panic. She barely managed a greeting before blurting out that Allison had been arrested. The details were chaotic, something about a stolen scooter and an altercation outside a bar in Naples. My father jumped in next, saying they needed bail money, or at least someone on the outside who could handle the paperwork. They spoke so quickly I could barely understand each piece of the puzzle, but their plea was unmistakable. Wire them money, contact the embassy, do whatever it took to get Allison out. I felt 1,000 emotions flooding me, but what emerged was the sting of betrayal. After everything they'd done, they still expected me to rush to her rescue. For once, I hesitated. I wanted them to know this wasn't automatic, that I wasn't their safety net to be used at their convenience. And as my mother kept pleading, I realized I was about to make a choice that would sever the bonds of family in a way no apology could fix. I was done being their convenient scapegoat for all. I listened to Mom's frantic sobs and heard Dad muttering curses in the background, each syllable twisting the knife deeper. For so long, I had felt overlooked, but this moment brought everything into stark relief. They had made their choice when they gave my ticket to Allison. They had made their choice when they asked her to accompany them instead of inviting me, the person who paid for it all. Now, they realized the hole they were in and suddenly needed my help to climb out. My voice shook as I said the words I never imagined saying, "I can't help you." Mom gasped. Dad barked into the phone, demanding an explanation. I spoke slowly, each word tasting of bitterness. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any more money to spare. Maybe you can ask Allison's friends or figure out something else. I'm not in a position to step in like this." It was both truth and lie. I wasn't exactly destitute, but I also wasn't about to drain my emergency savings just so Allison could slip back into her carefree existence. Dad growled something about how ungrateful I was, and Mom's pleas turned into accusations. Did I really want my sister rotting in a foreign jail? My chest felt tight, but I refused to buckle. For once, I would not be their doormat. The line went silent except for Mom's intermittent sobs. After a tense pause, I said goodbye and hung up. Shame and anger writhed inside me, but beneath it all was a calm acceptance. I had stood up for myself. Little did I know, however, that refusing was only the first step in a far darker game my parents were about to set in motion, leaving me with a choice I dreaded to make. Barely 2 days passed before I found myself entangled in a legal nightmare. An unexpected call from an Italian number jolted me awake one morning. On the other end, a man introduced himself as a local attorney representing my sister. He spoke English with a thick accent, explaining he'd been contacted by someone named Richard Harris, my father, to handle the case. But here was the twist. My parents had apparently provided my information as Allison's legal representative. That meant my name was on all official documents, as though I were the one who initiated the legal defense. My confusion quickly morphed into fury. Despite my explicit refusal to assist, they had gone behind my back and signed papers that effectively dragged me into responsibility for my sister's predicament. The attorney informed me that as Allison's listed contact, I was expected to coordinate with him, arrange bail funds, and even oversee any potential travel restrictions. He told me there was a court date looming, and if I failed to comply, it could jeopardize Allison's outcome. My head reeled. I was halfway around the world, minding my own life, and now saddled with legal obligations I had never agreed to. I told the attorney there must be some mistake, but he calmly explained there was no mistake at all. My father had furnished my signature electronically. As bizarre as it sounded, the documents bore a digital signature under my name. It was an unbelievable betrayal I never thought possible. My parents had not just ignored my boundaries, they had obliterated them. That day, something inside me shifted irreversibly. I vowed that I would not let them trample over my autonomy ever again, and I would make sure their betrayal came back to haunt them in ways they could never anticipate. The first thing I did was consult a lawyer here at home. A colleague of mine recommended a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Sandra Brenner, who specialized in international legal disputes. The moment I laid out the situation, she bristled with indignation. She explained that forging a signature to designate someone as a legal representative was not only unethical, but potentially criminal. If I wanted to press charges, this could escalate into a serious case. However, the immediate dilemma remained. My name was already on official paperwork in Italy, meaning I had certain obligations unless I formally contested them. Before I acted, I sent messages to my parents, demanding they explain themselves. Instead of contrition, I received a barrage of guilt-laden texts. Mom wrote that I was overreacting, that they were just trying to help Allison. Dad claimed he'd done it because someone has to handle this and we can't from overseas. The hypocrisy made my blood boil. They were still in Europe, continuing their vacation while expecting me to mop up their mess. Sandra advised me on how to disclaim responsibility and revoke the fraudulent documentation. But she also cautioned that it could drag out in Italian courts, complicating things further. Part of me wanted to drop the hammer, press charges against my own parents, and watch them squirm. Another part remained uncertain. Could I really unleash the law on the people who raised me? My fury warred with my lingering sense of familial duty. For days, I wrestled with the implications, each scenario fueling my growing desire for justice. If they wanted a fight, I would show them that their betrayal had more severe consequences than they ever anticipated. The revenge tempted me in ways I could no longer ignore. This time, I wouldn't back down. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and strategic planning. Sandra laid out two main paths. First, I could officially dispute the signature and denounce my parents for fraud. That would likely force the Italian authorities to reevaluate the bail paperwork and possibly imprison Allison until she found another legal sponsor. Second, I could play along just long enough to extricate myself from the case without causing an international scandal. But either route came with complications. I refused to be the unsuspecting scapegoat. Yet part of me saw an opportunity. If I exposed my parents' deceit, they would finally face real consequences for prioritizing Allison over me all these years. They had never been held accountable. Perhaps witnessing Allison's predicament would compel them to acknowledge my worth. A vindictive voice inside whispered, "Let her rot for a while. Let them feel the panic of not knowing what to do. Let them see what happens when you're no longer their sucker." Still, I grappled with guilt. Allison was my sister, despite everything. Could I truly stand by while she languished in a foreign jail? Then I recalled the trip, the way they cut me out, and how she boasted about enjoying my gift. My resolve solidified. People reap what they sow, and I owed them nothing. It was time to let my parents taste the consequences of their manipulation. After thought, I told Sandra I wanted to file a formal dispute. I would not protect them any longer. If my family had chosen to manipulate me, they would face the fallout in a courtroom. It felt drastic, but I'd run out of patience. They had made their bed, and now they would lie in it, with no mercy from me left to grant. Filing the dispute set off an immediate chain reaction. The Italian attorney, startled by my sudden refusal to cooperate, messaged me in urgent tones, warning this could complicate Allison's release. The local police briefly detoured to investigate whether a forgery had taken place. My sister's hearing got delayed, leaving her in custody an extra week. Meanwhile, my phone exploded with furious calls from my parents, who had cut their sightseeing short and rushed to Naples. They demanded to know why I was abandoning the family. Abandoning the family? I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. When had they paused to consider my feelings? I let their calls go to voicemail, ignoring the venomous text messages they sent. My heart pounded whenever the phone buzzed, but I stayed resolute. Each voicemail was the same. Mom, sobbing and pleading. Dad, threatening to disown me if I didn't reverse the dispute. They accused me of selfishness, ignoring that they'd initiated this entire mess by forging my signature. Sandra sent official notices to the Italian court, clarifying that I denied any legal responsibility. She also demanded the immediate removal of my name from Allison's paperwork. The tension within me lingered, but every new confrontation reaffirmed my choice. I was done yielding to their manipulations. Let them flail. Let them see how it felt when they needed someone who wouldn't come running. The day Allison stood before the judge, I sat in my kitchen, sipping cold coffee, phone silent on the table. My parents had tried to bury me in this quagmire, and now they would wade through it themselves. I knew there was no turning back. Whatever the outcome, my relationship with them would never be the same, but I couldn't pretend to care anymore. My heart felt battered, but free. Weeks passed, and the legal chaos persisted. The Italian authorities eventually dropped the forgery inquiry, likely deeming it a family matter not worth extensive court time. However, the dispute I filed was enough to revoke my status as Allison's legal contact. Without me involved, my parents had to pay for a local attorney themselves. Allison, facing charges of theft and disturbing the peace, wound up stuck in Italy for nearly a month, restricted from leaving until the legal proceedings concluded. My parents burned through their travel budget, living in hotels, pacing courthouse hallways, and dealing with translators. Meanwhile, I went about my daily life feeling a certain satisfaction at their predicament. One morning, an unfamiliar knock sounded on my apartment door. Peering through the peephole, I froze. It was my mother, travel-worn and agitated. When I let her in, she spent the first 5 minutes criticizing my one-bedroom place. from the peeling wallpaper to the dusty bookshelf. Typical. Then she begged me to reconsider, to call off my attacks on the family, as if I were the villain. I silently observed the lines on her face, the desperation in her eyes. She rambled about how Allison wasn't a bad person, just impulsive and naive. She claimed Dad had only done what he thought necessary, that forging my signature was an honest mistake. With a bitter smirk, I told her honest mistakes didn't involve deception across international borders. Her tears began, but I felt unmoved. She wanted me to capitulate, to bail them out again. I folded my arms and waited for her to finish, all the while thinking about how I had reached this point of apathy. Our roles had reversed. She was begging, and I was ready to watch them crumble, if that meant preserving my self-respect. In the end, Allison was given a minor sentence of community service and a hefty fine, which my parents begrudgingly paid. They returned stateside worn down. Their once glamorous vacation turned into a harrowing ordeal. Not once did they apologize for forging my name or putting me through emotional torment. Instead, they acted as if I were the betrayer, the child who failed them. Our final confrontation happened one chilly afternoon at their house. The walls still bore photographs of a smiling Allison, her achievements celebrated in frames, while I stood absent in dusty corners of memory. Dad demanded to know why I had punished them so brutally. That word nearly made me laugh. I told him I owed them nothing after their betrayal. The conversation escalated. Mom wept, claiming families forgive. Not this time, I replied. They were stunned by my unwavering refusal to yield. Months later, I moved across the country, taking a new job offer and leaving behind all the bitterness. I cut off contact with them, ignoring frantic messages alternating between anger and regret. My life found a fresh start. No more overshadowing, no more second-class role. In my quiet moments, I still mourn the family I never truly had. Yet I refuse to lament what I cannot change. Sometimes people demand forgiveness without offering genuine remorse. My parents and sister taught me that. I will not grant absolution where none is earned. They used me like an afterthought, forging my name when it suited them. Their betrayal cut deep, and I refused to stitch it up for them. Now I stand firmly on my own, carrying my self-respect forward like a shield. They lost me the moment they took what was mine and gave it to Allison. There is no going back, only